The Frozen Awakening. The Arctic night stretched endlessly, an abyss of darkness and ice, interrupted only by the artificial glow of floodlights that surrounded the excavation site. The storm had subsided hours ago, but the biting cold still clung to every surface, wrapping around the research station like a silent predator. Dr. Elena Santos adjusted her thermal suit as she peered down into the kilometer-deep excavation pit. 3 weeks ago, this had been just another geological survey mission. Now, it was the center of what could be the most significant discovery in human history. At the bottom of the pit lay the sphere, 30 meters of smooth obsidian black material that devoured every scanning attempt thrown at it. No reflection, no heat signature, and no visible seams. It was as if reality itself bent around its surface. Energy levels are rising again. Dr. James Chen's voice crackled through her earpiece, pulling her out of her thoughts. He was up in the command center, surrounded by an array of monitors feeding real-time data from the sensors surrounding the sphere. Still climbing? Elena asked, gripping the steel scaffolding as she began her descent into the pit. Yeah, and it's not following any recognizable pattern. It's almost like it's responding to us. Elena swallowed. They had tried every method they could think of: sonic mapping, electromagnetic probing, even thermal analysis. Nothing had penetrated the sphere's surface, but the more they dug, the more it reacted. As she reached the pit floor, her boots crunched against the frost-covered ground. The air was unnaturally still, and despite the Arctic conditions, there was something off about the temperature. It wasn't just cold, it was empty. She approached the sphere, her breath slow and measured. The rippling patterns along its surface were faint but unmistakable. They pulsed with an eerie rhythm, almost like brainwaves, James murmured through the radio. I ran a comparison with neural activity scans. The sphere's energy pulses are mimicking the frequencies of a living mind. Elena's breath hitched. You're saying this thing is alive? I'm saying it's thinking. A chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic winds ran down her spine. Suddenly, the ripples across the sphere's surface intensified. The pulsing became more erratic, the patterns shifting and reshaping with increasing speed. The entire structure seemed to shudder. Elena, step back. James's voice was sharp now. We're seeing another spike. Before she could move, the surface of the sphere turned to liquid. The midnight black material rippled outward, expanding like ink spilling across water. Elena instinctively raised her arm, shielding her visor as a bright flash of blue light erupted from the sphere. For a moment, the world disappeared. The vision. When her vision returned, she wasn't in the Arctic anymore. Elena gasped. She was standing, but not on ice. The ground beneath her was smooth, metallic, and warm to the touch. All around her stretched a vast, towering city. The sky overhead was not Earth's. It was dark, but filled with swirling patterns of stars, unlike anything she had ever seen. The structures around her were impossible, organic curves mixed with advanced metallic designs, glowing conduits running along their surfaces like veins of energy. And then she saw them. Tall, radiant figures moving through the streets of this impossible city. Their forms were humanoid, yet somehow beyond human. Their skin shimmered like liquid metal, and their eyes burned with an inner light. She wasn't just seeing them. She was inside their memories. The figures, these ancient beings, walked through their city with purpose. Their movements were precise, each action deliberate. But there was something underneath. A tension, a fear. Then the sky shifted. A crack split the heavens above, and something descended. A darkness unlike anything she had ever imagined. Not a fleet, not an army. A hunger. Elena's breath caught in her throat as the ancient beings turned toward the growing shadow. They raised their hands, activating glowing sigils across their bodies. The city itself responded, its towers shifting, reshaping into colossal defensive structures. And then, war. Elena felt it. The impact of weapons not meant for humans, energy so powerful that the very fabric of reality trembled under its force. The city fought. The beings fought. But the darkness was relentless. It consumed. One by one, the radiant figures fell. Their city crumbled. The darkness spread, devouring their world, erasing everything they had ever been. And then, in the final moments of their civilization, they built the sphere. A final, desperate act. A message, a warning, or a weapon. Elena gasped as the vision collapsed. The sphere awakens. She was back in the Arctic. Her knees buckled, and she barely caught herself before falling. Her breathing was ragged, her body drenched in cold sweat despite the freezing air. "Elena, what happened?" James's voice was frantic. She turned her gaze back to the sphere. It was no longer dormant. The surface was alive. The rippling patterns had stabilized, forming glowing veins of energy that spread outward into the ice, illuminating the entire excavation site. "Elena," James's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's waking up." A deafening boom echoed across the frozen wasteland. The energy pulses reached the surface, sending shockwaves across the Arctic landscape. And then, for the first time, the sphere spoke. Not with sound, not with words, but directly into her mind. "You were never meant to find us." Elena's breath caught. The patterns across the sphere pulsed, forming new symbols. "Coordinates." James's voice cracked over the radio. "We just picked up an unknown signal." "No, multiple signals. They're broadcasting across the entire planet." Then, from high above, in the darkness of Earth's orbit, something shifted. A cloaked observation vessel, unseen by any human technology, came to life. Inside, first observer Zix 427 froze as his instruments screamed with activity. The readings were impossible. The sphere should never have activated. And yet it had. His six-fingered hands trembled as he sent an urgent message across the void of space. The elders had to be warned. Humanity had just woken up something buried for a reason. And now, something was coming. The signal that shook the stars. Elena's breath came in ragged gasps as the weight of the vision threatened to pull her down. The sphere, no, the artifact, hummed with a deep, otherworldly resonance, its energy spreading through the ice like veins of fire. Her mind still reeled from the glimpse into a civilization long past, their desperate struggle against an enemy too vast to comprehend. James's voice crackled over the comms, barely holding back his panic. "Elena, what's happening down there? Our instruments are going insane. Energy readings just went off the charts, and we're picking up transmissions, multiple frequencies, all coming from the sphere." Elena forced herself to stand, her legs trembling beneath her. She turned her visor toward the glowing symbols now etched across the Arctic ice, pulsing in rhythmic patterns that defied human logic. "It's broadcasting," she said, barely recognizing her own voice. "This thing, it was never just buried. It was sealed, and we just opened it." James cursed. Sealed against what? Elena looked up, past the rim of the pit, into the frozen sky. The stars overhead seemed no different than before, silent, distant, indifferent. And yet, something was watching. The observer in the void. High above Earth, beyond the reach of human satellites, the cloaked observation vessel Eternal Vigilance had entered emergency mode. The alien first observer Zix 427 stared at his monitor, his usually cold, logical mind overwhelmed by the horror unfolding before him. The sphere had activated. That should have been impossible. For 200 years, his species had monitored Earth, maintaining a strict no-contact directive. The humans were primitive, barely capable of space travel, their weapons crude and inefficient. They were reckless, unpredictable, and most of all, unaware of the larger cosmic forces beyond their planet. But now, everything had changed. Zix 427's trembling fingers danced across the control panel, sending an urgent transmission to the Elder Council. His secondary eyes flicked to the scanner feed. The sphere was no longer dormant. Its energy signature was spreading outward, not just through Earth's atmosphere, but into space. It was a beacon, and something was responding. The awakening of the ice. Back at the excavation site, the Arctic trembled. The ice, solid for thousands of years, began to crack. Deep, rumbling tremors shuddered through the ground, sending jagged fractures across the pit. Floodlights flickered and failed as an unseen force drained them of energy. "Elena, get out of there," James shouted. But Elena couldn't move. The sphere was changing. Its surface, once smooth and featureless, began to shift, patterns folding into one another, forming a complex lattice of symbols. The air around it was charged with static, and for the first time, Elena heard a sound. A low, mournful hum, a song of something ancient, something lost. Then, the ice exploded. Chunks of frozen earth launched into the air as something massive began to rise beneath the sphere. Elena barely had time to react before she was thrown backward, her body tumbling across the frozen ground. Above her, a structure emerged. Not metal, not stone. It was alive. A towering construct of shifting energy and impossible geometry, its surface pulsating with blue fire. A ship. Not human, not alien in the way Earth's scientists understood. Something else. The sphere had not been buried. It had been waiting. The Elder's desperate warning. Light years away, in the heart of the Heller Dominion, the Elder Council convened in an emergency session. The transmission from 6427 had already spread through the ranks of the Empire's ruling class, causing panic unseen in generations. The Elder Primarch's elongated form quivered, his golden eyes flashing with barely concealed dread. The humans have awakened the Dragon Soul battleship. A ripple of fear swept through the chamber. A younger noble scoffed, though his voice wavered. Ridiculous. The humans are barely out of their own atmosphere. How could they possibly? They did not build it, you fool. The Primarch snapped. They unleashed it. A silence fell. The records of the Dragon Soul battleship were ancient, hidden from all but the highest ranks of the Dominion. It was a relic of a war so devastating, even memory feared to touch it. A war against an enemy that had nearly consumed the stars. The Dominion had believed the war ended eons ago, that their greatest warriors had sealed the threat forever. They had been wrong. The humans had found the lock. And now, the door was opening. The countdown begins. Elena pushed herself onto her hands and knees, coughing. Her visor was cracked, frost creeping across her HUD. Around her, alarms blared as researchers scrambled to evacuate the site. But Elena didn't move. She stared up at the ship that had risen from the ice. It was beautiful, terrible. And then, a voice spoke. Not from the sphere, not from the ship. From inside her mind. The cycle repeats. Elena gasped, clutching her helmet. The voice wasn't human. It wasn't one voice. It was many. It was ancient. And it was waiting. James's voice was frantic over the radio. Elena, do you hear me? You need to get out. A new sound filled the air. A low, reverberating thrum. The ship was powering up. And in the void beyond Earth's skies, something answered. A distant, cosmic howl. Something else was coming. Something that had heard the call. Elena's eyes widened. The war that had ended before humanity had ever taken its first steps was about to begin again. And this time, Earth was on the front lines. Echoes of a forgotten war. Elena barely registered the chaos around her. The Dragon Soul battleship, a vessel that had slept beneath the ice for untold millennia, now loomed above the excavation site, its impossible geometry shifting, humming with a power that defied human understanding. The air around it crackled with unseen energy, waves of invisible force sending ice shards and debris swirling in ghostly patterns. She should have run. She should have followed the frantic voices in her earpiece, screaming for immediate evacuation. But she couldn't move. Not when something deep within her mind was not her own anymore. The voice, the many voices, were still there. Not speaking, not whispering, but watching, waiting. Then a pulse rippled through the ship's hull, and in an instant her surroundings changed. The memories of the forgotten. Elena was no longer in the Arctic. She was somewhere else. The ice and steel of the excavation site had vanished, replaced by a sky that burned with twin suns, their crimson glow stretching across an alien horizon. She stood upon a balcony of a towering citadel, the city below her unlike anything built by human hands. Great metallic spires twisted into the heavens, their surfaces pulsating with silver veins of living energy. Thousands of beings, not human, not machine, but something in between, moved in perfect synchrony below. Their bodies shimmered, ethereal and radiant, every step deliberate, calculated. They were preparing for war. And she wasn't just seeing it. She was feeling it, as if the memories of a civilization long dead had been poured directly into her mind. The arrival of the enemy. A tremor passed through the citadel, shaking the very foundation of this world. Elena turned her gaze skyward. The stars shifted. A great, roiling mass of darkness uncoiled from the void, descending upon the planet like a tidal wave of living shadow. It had no ships, no weapons in any conventional sense. It was the weapon. It moved like ink, spilled across the fabric of space, tendrils stretching toward the city below, consuming everything in its wake. Where it passed, light itself died. The radiant beings fought back. They raised their hands, unleashing energy so brilliant it burned her retinas. For a moment, they held the darkness at bay. Then the screaming began. The shadows were alive. They moved within minds, within flesh, reshaping their victims into something twisted. Elena felt it happen. A being stood beside her, one of their leaders, tall and regal, wearing a shimmering mantle of woven energy. His eyes met hers, but they did not see her. He was a memory, a ghost, but his voice reached her all the same. We were not enough. The city below burned. And then, for the first time, she saw it. Not just the darkness, not just the consuming tide, but what was inside it. Eyes, millions of them, watching, feeding, waiting. And then, the vision collapsed. The return to the present. Elena screamed as she was thrown back into her own body, her hands gripping the frozen ground as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Her breath came in sharp gasps, her pulse erratic. The Arctic air cut through her thermal suit, and for a brief moment, she was unsure if she was truly awake. Elena. James's voice was frantic in her earpiece. What happened? Your vitals just... Jesus, are you okay? She blinked, focused. The Dragon Soul battleship still hovered above, its hull shifting, shimmering with an eerie light. She choked on the words. I saw them. Who? What are you talking about? Elena's fingers dug into the snow as she struggled to ground herself. The ones who built this ship, the ones who fought. They were at war. James was silent for a long moment. Then his voice returned, filled with something new, something close to terror. Elena, he whispered, you need to get to the command center. Now. The sky trembles. Elena barely made it up the steel scaffolding leading to the command outpost. The moment she breached the entrance, she was met with panic. Scientists and engineers scrambled between monitors, their faces pale with confusion and fear. Status, she demanded, forcing herself to stay composed. James didn't look up from his screen. His hands gripped the console so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Something heard the signal. A hush fell over the room. James turned the monitor toward her. Elena's stomach dropped. On the screen, a tear had opened in space. Not a wormhole, Not a distortion, the literal wound in the fabric of the universe itself. And from within that wound, something was coming. Massive, unrelenting, and hungry. James's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's them, isn't it?" Elena stared at the void taking shape before them. The same tendrils of darkness she had seen in her vision now stretching toward Earth. She didn't need to answer, because the alarms blaring across every military satellite confirmed what they already knew. A warning too late. At that moment, the Halar Dominion's Elder Council received the same transmission. They had been monitoring the humans since the excavation site first activated. They had debated intervention. Some wanted to destroy the humans before they could unlock the ship's secrets. Now, it didn't matter. They were too late. The Elder Primarch's voice was grim. "It has begun." The Halar military officers surrounding him stiffened. "We must act," one of them urged. "We cannot let Earth fall." The Primarch's gaze did not waver. "We have already lost." The chamber fell into silence. Then, from the void of space, the first shadow crossed into real space. And the war that had once ended with a desperate sacrifice had now begun again. This time, there would be no second chance.